there's not very many of us. So if you do have questions, feel free to just unmute and ask as we go along. That'll be fine. So my background is in horticulture, plant science, and then I also have a degree in landscape architecture. So I hopefully all of this will be useful and some practical ideas for how to create a waterwise landscape and hopefully a useful and functional landscape as well. All right, so waterwise landscape design. I use this term. I prefer waterwise landscape design as opposed to xeriscape. So if anybody's heard xeriscape, this is kind of the idea that most people have in mind is the gravel with some cactus, maybe a bleached out skull and a wagon wheel is kind of what most people think of when they hear the term xeriscape. So xeric it comes from the Greek for dry, but I think it also people kind of equate it with a zero, like a non-landscape is what comes into most people's heads. Even though I really do think the Xeriscape Council has some great, really great ideas and principles that they espouse, but I think at this point that really really the term has some pretty strong reactions for people, which is why I prefer waterwise landscapes, which I really do believe can be beautiful, functional. There are things that you can still have plants, you can have trees and shade and color and all the things that you would want in a landscape, while still doing our best to preserve the water resources that are definitely limited in our region. So all right. I'm going to talk a little bit about, my bias, maybe because I am a landscape architect. So I think that you should have a landscape design. And when we don't have a plan, when we don't know what we're doing, this is what happens. You've seen some suburban sprawl. You've seen the flat expanses of grass with maybe one little tree. And uh, it's fine. You know, it I think that grass does a lot of things not very well. So uh but it is for a lot of us the fallback answer. If we don't know what we want to do, this is what we do is we plant a whole bunch of grass. And and so I'm going to talk through some ways to hopefully come up with a little bit of a more of a design for your yard. This is Uh, on campus, this takes a whole semester to teach landscape design. We're not going to get quite into that depth, but hopefully it'll give you some tips and maybe some starting point for how you can um, get get started with this. So, first thing I'd like you to think about doing is creating a site program. So, what I mean by that is just a list of things that you want to do in your yard. And I haven't. I haven't caused any divorces yet, but I have caused some discussions, I think, with some couples that I've worked with. And but what I want you to do with this, it's not just a list of, I want it to be pretty and functional. I want you to get into some real detail here, and I even more detail than I want to. A lot of people will put, uh, tell me that they want to be able to entertain in their backyard. Well, entertain can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So that can mean, um, you know, that might mean that I have a basketball hoop and I play with my friends. That might mean that I have, I might have a pit where I'm going to roast a whole pig. That might mean that I have a gazebo or somewhere where I'm going to have a fancy garden party. Those are all entertaining in your backyard, but they have very different requirements and uh, and really need a different kind of space. So thinking through all the ways, all the things that you actually want to do. So saying I want to grow grow my own food, what is it that you actually really like? Is that an herb box in your kitchen window, or is that, rows and rows of corn, heirloom tomatoes, whatever that is. I want you to be specific when you think about creating a program for your space. And like I said, this may cause some discussions. I've been with some couples consulting, and they act like they've never talked to each other before. It's really, you want what? That's what you mean. So have that discussion and narrow it down, because when I said when you have a plan, you're able to create a better landscape and one that's more functional, one that uses water more efficiently. So once you have a site program, then you want to start thinking about designing functional living spaces. So all those things that you thought about, then you need to put them into place in your yard. So in this particular design, it's kind of a weird shape, and they had there were some challenges with this one, but one of the things they wanted was a vegetable garden. That's over here, simply because this is the place that had enough sunshine. So thinking about where you can actually fit some of these in, this was a place that the vegetables would grow. These are some fruit trees. They worked out well here, because it also sort of blocked off the bad view of the neighbors. And then we have a seating area here. I think that's a little grill right there, kind of coming out of the kitchen doorway there. And then, you know, uh, we've got bike storage in the shed, next to the garage and that driveway there. Try to fit in all the things that are important to you, um, and finding a home for all of those. Because if we have things that we want to do and we understand what kind of space we need to do those activities, we can come up with a better landscape design, and one that's going to use water more efficiently, mostly because we are using it intentionally and on the things that we want, rather than just watering a whole lot of grass. Or I like grass, and grass has a place. The grass fits in this landscape as well. We've got the little soccer area, and that's perfect for grass. There are things that grass does really, really well, but as being a catch-all, it's a lot of work and a lot of water, if it's not the right thing for you. All right. So once we have kind of that idea of delineating areas within our yard, then we can go about developing outdoor rooms. And I think this concept, all of us sort of understand how to make this work inside. We develop, we have the kitchen has a function, and we know what things work in that room. Outside, we can do the same thing. So we have a floor outside, and we can choose um, what that surface should be. I like this photo because we've got some actual walls. We've got some trees sort of acting as walls. The trees canopy is maybe acting as a little bit of a roof, giving us some shade and protection. We've got some shorter stuff here that might act more as just an indicator of where you need to move, rather than a thick barrier. But it creates a space that we can feel comfortable in. Um, all right. And when you're working on this, you need to think a little bit about space and scale. So this is, I think we understand this inside a little bit easier sometimes. So this little reading nook, it's perfect it's the kind of place where we would feel comfortable reading. But you sort of get the idea that even if there are two people sitting in here, that you're not going to be talking very loudly. It's not that kind of space. If you have somewhere bigger and open, higher ceiling, that's somewhere that you can get a little bit louder. But for an activity like sitting quietly, reading, relaxing here, it's going to be, we brought the floor up a little bit. We've enclosed this, and it's created a space where we're gonna slow down and be a little quieter. Um, and we can do the same same types of things outside. So this pergola here, landscapers like to joke that pergolas are really expensive for roofs that don't do a whole lot. It's not going to protect you it's not going to protect you from a lot of rain. It's not really going to protect you from a lot of sun. It does sort of a half job of shading and covering you up. But when you look at this yard here, if you were going to eat dinner in this backyard, you're putting the table right here, right? Because it creates a space that you feel more comfortable. It drops that height, the height of, the ceiling overhead, and it makes it more comfortable for you to be there eating. It creates instantly a space that feels more natural for us. So there's this idea of psychologically that humans evolved on the edges of, we feel most comfortable with our back against the tree looking out across the savanna. So this idea of a refuge, and then we look out from our place that's more comfortable. So we like views, but we like a nice sheltered spot to see them from is another way to think about it when you're designing your backyard. So big wide open spaces, not perfect for everything. You might want to, with a pergola, with trees, with bushes, create some lower ceilings, some cozier spaces within your landscape. All right. So what does this all have to do with water? Uh, One of the other things that I think is vital for creating a water-wise landscape is to think about this idea of hydrozones. I don't know, has anybody ever heard that term before, hydrozone, or thought about it? So what the idea is, it's a pretty simple concept. Um, and what it is that we want to group together all the plants with the same water requirement into the same area. So so this design right here was kind of interesting because it was pretty pronounced with these sort of stripes here. But um, all of the plants in this area, for instance, would have basically the same water requirements. Because what happens if you decide you want to plant a yucca because it's going to save water, but then you plant it right next to your bleeding hearts and your roses. The yucca is going to suffer because you're going to overwater it to take care of those things that need the water. But because it's so close, it's going to get overwatered. So if you if you want to consider using native plants, drought tolerant plants, things that are going to use less water, you need to put them in a place where you can actually water them less. So if you're just mixing them in with areas of plants that require a lot, they'll get overwatered is typically what happens. And some plants will be okay with that and maybe grow a little bigger or faster than they would in a drought situation or taking up a little less water. But sometimes, in the case of that yucca, they really can't handle that much water, and so they'll actually die. So, creating hydrozones, thinking about, so like this area out here with the mailbox. That's not a spot that really needs to be particularly lush. It's not a spot you're going to spend a lot of time. And so maybe putting drought tolerant plants, things that are drier out there, it'll keep water off your sidewalk. And, that's the idea of, a lot of communities have that flip the strip program where you're taking out the sprinklers from this park strip right here against the street, and that can really be a great place to put water-wise plants. And the back of your yard, places that you don't walk very often, that's another place for plants that may need not little irrigation or no irrigation, things that can be okay on their own. Those are the things that you put farther out where you're not going to be spending as much time, where because they can handle being on their own without a lot of extra work. Things that are going to be close to, right around your back porch. Those are those are places where you'd want to maybe have a little bit more, have plants that require a little more water. So if you've got kind of a water budget that you're working toward, uh, that's where you'd want to spend the water is putting it close by your space. Because because honestly, some of the things that we really like about plants is, they create a nice microclimate for us. There's a little bit more humidity around them because they're watered. It's cooler. And so plants that give us those nice things, those are things we want to put where we're going to be spending our time. Not out, by the back fence, not out by the mailbox. Those can be things that we don't want to spend time or resources to take care of. All right. So what we really want to do is use the water that comes into our yard. So most of us are not going to ever have rain quite like this. Occasional flash flood. Probably don't want to be outside if it's raining quite like this, but we want to use the water that does come into our yard effectively. Um, because water can be forceful, and I think all of us in the arid West sort of understand, flash flooding and how it can be really destructive. But water can also be an asset and something that we do want to use in our spaces. So uh, the nice thing about water is that it's very predictable. It moves with gravity. And so, it can be moving down this pretty steep road very quickly. It also, when it's allowed to slow down, it moves with gravity and moves into the soil profile and would be absorbed uh, down into the soil, which is maybe more ideal for what we want to have happen. So, in order to use it more effectively, what we want to do is to slow it down. So, when it's moving very quickly, in torrents like that, it's not going to be able to move into our soil profile. But if we can slow it down, if we can spread it out, then we can sink it down into the ground and we can store it. And so those are sort of the principles that we want to think about for Waterwise landscaping. We do want to also think about safety. So water, it can be destructive. We want to make sure that we're moving around our structures. So we don't want water going in basements or eroding foundations. So if you've got a backyard with a hill, you don't want to be grading it so that it runs right into your house. So what we want to think about for in this instance is that we want to move the water around. This is sort of the plan view from above. We're moving it around, so we want to have a little bit of a dip here at the base of this slope, so that our house is a little bit higher than than the surrounding areas, so that water is going to come slide down from the house, or when it's coming down this hill, that it's going to stop here, and then we grade it so it moves around the house instead. We also want to think about grading for water capture. Now, this doesn't mean that we have to have huge changes in elevation in a small backyard. Sometimes that can be really interesting and can be done very beautifully. But really just, an inch or two difference in elevations. We call it sometimes micro grading, and just sloping things very gently. We can spread that water out and allow it to sink in. So, but what we want to think about is sinking water in these low spots, and that's where we want to put our plants. And then the higher spots we want are going to be drier, and so that's where we want to think about having pathways, patios, areas where you're going to um, have maybe pavement or something where you're going to be walking and you want it a little bit drier. So I know there was a huge, I think it's still a little bit of a trend, the dry riverbed as a Waterwise landscape feature. They're putting in this fake little stream, and then they very you know elegantly put these little plants around the edges. that's okay, but they're really missing out. Because it's not an actual stream, those plants would actually be getting some water if they put them down in the bottom of that little stream bed, um, as opposed to kind of on the edges where they're really going to be a little bit drier. So, um, so there's the idea of rain gardens. Probably a lot of us have seen these. I think you know, not typically in Utah. These are things that you might see on vacation if you're in Seattle, Oregon, but they are places that utilize water and are capturing it to kind of for a purpose. So a rain garden, this is something that you absolutely can do in Utah. uh, and I like this diagram. It shows a little bit about how this is sort of laid out. So we've got water coming from the roof when it rains, and from the gutters, it can come from the downspout through this gravel path or through a drain pipe, or they are probably also hopefully have graded um, this yard just a little bit so everything's tipping this direction, and anything that's falling here is also moving toward the rain garden. But as it comes in from a downspout or this drain pipe, they've got a little bit of a rocky area here, and that's to slow things down and kind of prevent erosion at this point. So they can hit the rocks and then move a little bit more slowly into the rain garden. So um, this section right here, we show that we can see where it's cut down just a little bit on this section, but uh, the plants that need the most water are, again, this is sort of a hydrozone situation. So these plants, anytime it rains, it's going to go to this lowest spot, and these are going to get a little bit of an extra boost of water. And then around the edges, these are plants that, if we have a really great storm, it's going to fill the whole thing. And so these on the edge are going to get water if that happens. So they're plants that can handle a little bit more drought, and they're put in a place where they're only going to be getting that extra water if we get a particularly good storm. So, all right. One thing I would suggest that you think about when you are planning your landscape, whether this is existing landscape or you're doing something new, is to think about developing a water flow diagram. So I talked about, grading just ever so slightly uh, to make sure that when water comes into your yard, that it's going into a place. We don't necessarily in this one, there was no great way for this to happen. So this driveway, when water hits, it is going to the street, and that's that's a little bit sad. But for the rest of the yard, there most of this is going areas where it can be used. So this, this grassy area right here is tipped just a little, so where all of the water is going to go into the trees. This patio, it's going to go into this little. I think this was a little herb garden, or some of it's going back toward the bushes. Anything on the roof on this side is going to be going into the vegetable patch if water does hit. All right. All right. So there's a few other things so once you have a plan, and this can be an ongoing process of planning and working through some of these ideas. But I've got a few tips on, some landscape implementation that might be helpful. So downspouts, okay. Again, I think that if you have water coming from your rain gutters, I think you ought to do something with it. Any water that falls in your yard, I think you should have a plan. The engineers of the world want that to go down to the storm sewers immediately and have that be gone. But it is always better if you can, anything that you can store in your own soil, helping out the plants in your own garden is going to be an advantage. So downspouts from your rain gutters. You can have those. Okay, so you can see this attaches to a pipe here. It's not just running free. And then this is buried. You can do underground drainage. These pipes come and then pop up. They can pop up in a lawn. They can pop up in a flower bed. You can actually, some of these pipes are perforated so that you can have them sort of seeping water the whole length of this pipe. But that's one way you can do uh, for for utilizing that drainage. Another thing is you can store some of that water. Now, like I said, I always think that storing it in the ground is better. So, having groundwater for your trees and shrubs is always going to make them healthier. But there's also quite a bit of water that you could be storing in barrels. So you can do rain barrels or cisterns, which are just a bigger, just bigger than a barrel. It's basically the same concept. If you are going to store water, I would recommend that you cover these so that you're not going to be creating a breeding area for mosquitoes. So they need to be covered with some mesh. This one is pretty low tech here. It's up on a brick and has a faucet at the bottom so that you can attach a hose and then just gravity will allow that water to come out. You know, uh, I did a little research on why we do the 55-gallon drum here. Basically, that is about what one person can move with a dolly. So if it gets to 56 gallons, it's too heavy. So that's why we kind of settled on that size. But these are fairly inexpensive to find and can store. Uh, Again, it's not going to replace all of your water needs, but it can help supplement if you are going to store water in barrels or in a cistern. And you can there are some regulations on how much you're allowed to store per parcel of land. Um, but you can look into those. But I had some rainwater harvesting calculations just to give you an idea of, a catchment area. So if you measure out your roof is a catchment area or, patio that's going to be flowing into this area. Um, so catchment area by inches, and then converting to gallons. I usually put in a runoff coefficient. So that means that typically you're not going to get 100% of the water that falls on your roof landing in a rain barrel. Some of that's going to evaporate, some of that's going to end up other places. Your roof's not usually 100% efficient with that. But even taking 80% of that on a 2,500 square foot area of roof, 1 inch of rainfall can end up with 1,200 gallons. So it's a fairly large amount, definitely more than you would be able to store in one rain barrel, even for a very small rain event. Like an inch, you're getting a lot of water that's falling, and that's just on a roof. That's not necessarily the whole yard. So a lot of gallons can be added to your landscape if you're using it effectively, even for small rainfall. So this is me in price. These are inches per month. So that 1 inch may not happen all at once, and probably doesn't happen all at once, where I'm at anyway. Usually it would take a whole month maybe to rain that whole inch and through some of the drier parts of the year, you'd only be getting a half inch of water, but still quite a bit of several gallons that you could be utilizing more effectively. All right. Another thing that can be really helpful for gardening is amending your soil. So, um, amending amending your soil, adding organic material and improving that soil can help it hold water more effectively. Um, and so, it is always easier to add or improve the soil before you're planting. So if you can do this when you're creating a flower bed, when you're creating a vegetable patch, if you can add more organic material at that point, it's definitely easier to do at that point. And you'd want to be adding that into the areas that it's going to do the most good. So you typically, I mean, adding in huge amounts of organic material can be expensive. So this is a project in Cedar City where they were doing Waterwise landscape. So a good portion of this was going to be covered with gravel and sand. So we weren't adding compost or organic material to the ground that was going to be covered up with rock. So we were adding it into these areas where plants were going to be added. So improving the soil where it can do the most good and can help those plants hold water and use it more effectively. Um, so just incorporating, like I said, organic material is going to fix whether you have clay or sandy soil. Um, Organic matter through compost is going to be what will fix any of our soil problems. And you can also add, and this is for anybody, but for particularly landscapes that are already there, there's not a great way to, mix in compost once your flower bed is there. Once your trees are in place, you're not going to be touching those roots. But you can do is to add mulch, and this is one of the principles of xeriscape is to utilize mulch whenever possible. So it's going to help. Water loss to evaporation. It's going to help with soil temperatures. To an extent, it will help with weed seed germination. I have to say, weed seeds tend to blow around and land on top of that mulch. It's not going to be foolproof, but it can help. And but over time, the mulch is going to break down. So microbial action in the soil is going to break down that mulch and start moving it into your soil and improving the soil long term. So I know people complain, I'm constantly adding mulch every year to my garden. And that's usually a good thing. So, sometime some of it's probably going to blow away, but really, you want to be adding more mulch every year because that means that material is improving your soil and moving down into the soil profile. So, when we do mulch, at least 2 inches thick, preferably 3 or 4 inches is going to help with that help with weed pressure, but really help also water loss to evaporation. It's going to help with that if it's a thicker layer. I also think that mulch, as a landscape designer, I think it also adds a nice backdrop and makes your plants kind of pop out a little better just because you have that nice background color to it. When you are adding mulch and on new landscape installations, remember the finish grade. So this is a project I worked on, and I didn't take a great picture. I'm sorry, but you can see that this was going to have several inches of mulch added back. So that means that we weren't planting these with the crowns of the plants finished. Level with the soil that was right there, but we had them up a couple inches so that once the mulch was added, that they'd be right at that finished level. All right. Okay. Now this is the part where we've taken a lot of time on a lot of things that aren't plants for a gardening talk. This is usually the part that most people are interested in. Is putting the right plant in the right place. And this is, I think, really key to saving water and also just having a landscape that works. This is the trick, and I guess sort of the art of landscape design is figuring out what plant really needs to go where. And so my examples here, you can see I've got a yucca, a desert plant, and then I've got a willow, which willows love riverbanks. These are trees that want to be near water. So thinking about the right place for either of those, if you put it in the wrong one, the plant is not going to be happy. and it's not going to do the things that you want it to. So um, when we think about native plants, there's a huge push for native plants, which I think is great. I love plants. I think using plants from Utah helps create a sense of space for us. But using native plants in Utah can be a little tricky because we have a lot of really distinct regions. So, the aspen is our state tree. It's absolutely beautiful. We love it in the mountains. It does not want to live in the valley. And a lot of people try, well, it's a Utah native. It should do really well here, is their idea. And there are a lot of places in the state where an aspen tree is really going to suffer and is the wrong choice. This penstemon right here, there are so many varieties of penstemon in Utah and, different colors. And they really are specific to pretty kind of microclimates within the state. So they're only going to grow in the areas that suit them best. And there are also things like this blue grama, where some of the native plants have been actually brought into cultivation and are grown in nurseries. And some of the ones there in the nursery are really great because they have they've been cultivated to grow a specific way. So this particular, blue grama is going to grow, a certain height, and we know what that is. Whereas sometimes if you were collecting seeds, when you're out on your travels and then grow those out, you may get a wide variety of things happening in your yard. So sometimes finding some of those named varieties and things that have been grown in a nursery for a while, you get the benefits of a native plant, but you also get some benefits of knowing exactly what you're going to be getting. Um, all right. There are also some really great adaptive plants. I am not by any means a purist that says you have to only grow Utah natives. There are a lot of other things that work really well in our landscapes. A lot of them are very drought tolerant. This Russian sage, I think is maybe a little overplanted at this point, but it's planted a lot because it does really, really well here. It doesn't use water. It's pretty low maintenance, and a pretty plant. Things like your grandmother's peonies, uh, old-fashioned favorite one that I absolutely love, and surprisingly something that uses very little water. So this is one that doesn't look like maybe our perception of that desert cactus landscape that you think of for a dry landscape, but something that's not going to take a lot of water. And then there are things, this Washington hawthorn is native to the Pacific Northwest, but actually handles drought very, very well and is a tree that I think is should maybe be planted more here because it's very well adapted. So there are lots of great plants that aren't native to Utah that actually perform really well in Utah landscapes. There is also the dark side of adapted plants. We don't want things that are maybe too well adapted. So this tamarisk here is actually kind of pretty, but it's actually too well adapted to our climate, and we brought it in, and now it's choking out some of our rivers and displacing plants that are better for wildlife. So, I mean, this is not a terrible plant, but it grows too well, and it's forced out, as particularly in our river systems, some of the plants that our wildlife need to survive. So, be careful that you're not planting something that is going to become a noxious weed. And if you are have any questions, talk to Reagan, and if she doesn't know, somebody else in Extension will be able to figure that out for you before you plant something that you might hate. We are okay. We're okay. We'll get through what we get through here. The other thing that I want to recommend for using water efficiently in a waterwise landscape is irrigating efficiently. So we don't want water on the grass. We don't want to be watering inappropriately. We want to reduce loss from deep percolation. So irrigating our lawns, I think this is a good graphic, but it shows that lawns really, they're the roots are not going to go much more than 6 inches. And so if we're watering down, uh, you know, putting on water for hours at a time and just really saturating that soil, most of that is not doing your lawn much good. Now, it may be doing some good for the tree over here, which can have roots down to 24 inches. But really, this is where grouping things together sometimes can really help. Where you have maybe a shrub bed where everything's going to be watered down to 12 inches, and you know how often to do that. Whereas grass, which I absolutely think has a place in our landscapes, it needs to be watered shallow and a little more frequently. Most of us put on way more water than our grass needs and can actually use. Installing a smart controller. This is great. It works with weather station data. So if the temperature is not too hot, or if you've had rain that week, it's going to adjust how much it waters your yard. There is a $75 rebate through the state of Utah. There's something that if you're buying a new smart controller. And really, they can be, uh, research shows that they are really helpful in conserving water. Sometimes we just forget. But what I would say is that ultimately you should be the one in control of how much water goes in your yard. And, if for some reason this isn't working correctly, and if you see your sprinklers come on in the rain, maybe turn those off. Or if you know that there's a reason why you don't need to be watering your yard that week, then you can adjust that yourself. All right. Using drip irrigation whenever possible is a great idea. It's going to, for one, you're watering the plants that you want to be growing, and not watering the others. So sprinkler irrigation, flood irrigation is going to be giving water to weeds and lots of things that are not your target plant. So using drip irrigation and selectively watering is going to always help. All right, that was it. My last tip. I think we're right on time there. Does anybody have any questions, or have I put everybody to sleep? Um, Maybe.
If nobody, I'll ask you a question, Ralph.
Okay, yeah.
So, when you're picking plants or
Hmm.
for your Waterwise landscape, can you give all of our participants today kind of an overview on like what they should be looking for in terms of like what zone they live in? Because I know I did the UDAPT, the pollinator habitat kit,
Okay, yeah.
and I love it, but I think that some of the plants that were in my kit maybe didn't make it through the winter because we're so cold in Rich County. So maybe just touch on that.
Right. So I would suggest, do you know what USDA zone you're supposed to be in? Or
So Randolph and Woodruff are 4A, and then
okay,
Youngstown and Garden City are 4B.
okay. So I would suggest those are averages, and sometimes you have a cold winter and sometimes you don't. And um, what I would suggest is the things that you're spending a lot of money on and you really want to live, I would go down just a little. Like trees, I would, even though it says you're a 4A, I would probably get trees that are hardy down to a 3, because you may have a year and $300 and 5 years into having that tree, if you have a really cold snap there, you're going to feel pretty bad about losing it. If it's, a handful of seeds that you spent $3 on, maybe some live, maybe some don't. But I would say that, despite those hardiness zones are based on average winter temperatures, and there's never anything average about what happens here, right? Our winters are up and down, and you're likely going to have some cold temperatures for that are below what a 4A thinks that you will have. So I would go down just a little bit, especially for the things that are going to be big ticket items or big plants in your yard. Um, that is my suggestion. Also, I know we're talking about saving water, but watering, you maybe don't have as big a problem with this. Maybe you're just getting cold and staying cold. Um, if and that's uh, we want to make sure that going into uh, winter that all of our trees are pretty wet. So, if they're, especially our evergreens, you want to make sure that the soil is pretty damp before we get a frost. And if we have a winter where it's not that cold and things are warming up, you maybe get the hose out there and give them some water, and that really helps with um, keeping plants alive through the winter and through rough conditions. Is if they're a little bit more moist, they tend to do a little better. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but
Yes, thank you, Ralph.
Can I ask a question?
sure.
Can you suggest any website that make searching Waterwise plan easy? Like, for example, website that can group plans based on their like water requirements, zone, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think oh, I'm gonna have to find it, but USU has some good lists of waterwise plants. I think they've got some for pollinator plants, and they will put them kind of based on they do a oh, what do they call that? It's a like a water coefficient. It'll tell you kind of it it will help you group them together in the right zones that are similar. Um, Also, depending on you're not going to get this from a big box store, but if you go to a local nursery and go talk to the people there, I think that's a great resource. It's locally relevant information, and they're going to be able to tell you, this one. Uh, the tricky thing is that those tags at the nursery, most of those get printed for the whole United States in one place, and so whether they tell you information, some of them may say, full sun, but that doesn't necessarily mean full sun on the Colorado Plateau. That means full sun in the Pacific Northwest, and that's a different thing. So they are um, sometimes just talking to your master gardener group or people at the local nursery can give you some great advice on this one says that it's drought tolerant, but I've had trouble with it. Or this one, this particular plant, maybe, hopefully they're not bringing in plants that are not kind of the right zone for your area. Um, but I will get Reagan a list of, uh, I'll get you some links to those websites. I should have looked them up before I got here, but there are some good lists available.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. And those lists that Rose sends me, I'll make sure that I email them all to you so you guys have them.
All
Okay.
right. Do you
If
want you want to stop the recording? Sometimes we get the
oh,
weird questions after you.
yes, I'll